Hey there, welcome to my Dahlia Grow Along. So today I'm going to show you how I lift, wash and store my dahlias for winter. And I must admit, it's not my favourite job, I'll be really honest. And that's simply because by the time that I'm lifting my dahlias, it's normally raining almost all the time, like literally non-stop. It's raining now. I'm going to try to just wait for a bit of a break in the rain to actually go and show you. And it's normally really cold as well. So it's not the best job in the world. So actually, the earlier you can dig your dahlias, the better, because it will actually be a more pleasurable job if you can actually dig them earlier rather than doing it in the cold. And you might be thinking, is this something that I actually really need to do, or can I leave them in the ground? Well, yes and no. So it depends on your individual circumstances, really. So if you live in an area which is particularly wet, so here in my garden, it's very, very boggy. You can literally go paddling in my garden over the winter time. It gets so boggy and so wet. The water table is so high that there are literally pools of water and ponds that gather in my garden. So I actually have to raise my beds up as well for my dahlias, just to make sure they don't sit under the water table, because I have had a dahlia patch before that was unfortunately under the water table, and even though it was summertime, it was actually really wet and they rotted over summer, literally over summer. So I'm really careful now and I lift them up. So if you are in an area which is particularly wet, you probably shouldn't leave them in the ground, I'll be honest, because they will rot. You may also be in an area, maybe you live in the north of England or you live in Scotland, where it's particularly cold for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. You know, if it gets below like -5 for weeks and weeks on end where you live, it's probably not the best conditions for dahlias. So as soon as the frost comes, it will take the leaves, and what this means is it will turn them brown or black, and you'll know that you've had a frost because of that. And I've actually planted dahlias before as a sacrificial crop to see if my plot is in a frost pocket or not. And unfortunately, I have had at the same time I had 2 allotments, and I had some space on a farm as well where I was growing. And my 2 allotments were both in frost pockets, the farm wasn't. So I kind of got to learn that. So I'd literally planted some sacrificial crops, some in my front garden, some in my back garden, some at the farm, and then some on each of the allotments. So I could see which ones were going to frost first. So that's a really good way to actually test if you're in a frost pocket. So when the frost comes, it will blacken the leaves. And as long as your tuber is planted below the surface, so you're talking maybe 3 inches or so below the surface, then it will be absolutely fine. The tuber itself will be protected from a light frost. But if it gets particularly cold in your area, then it won't be protected. If the frost gets to the tuber will die, essentially. So this is why, if you do think that maybe you live in a location where you're on light ground, so again, clay isn't great because it holds a lot of moisture, they'll probably rot. So if you're on light soil and it's not too cold and it's not particularly wet where you are, you're not on a bog, you've got raised ground, then it might be worth trialing to see if you can leave your dahlias in the ground. It's a lot less work, let's face it. So you can trial that, and you don't necessarily have to dig, but you should probably mulch over the top, with a good maybe 6 or 7 inches of compost, mound it up, pop leaves over the top, anything to just keep them insulated, essentially. But if you're like me, you'll have to dig, unfortunately. And there's actually a really good benefit to digging, because if you want to increase your stock, well, the only way you can really do this is by digging them up and dividing them, or taking cuttings in the springtime. And really, you can't, it is possible, but it's not great to take cuttings out of dahlias which are in the ground. You need to essentially pre-start them and start them early, because they need a good kind of 120 days in the ground, so a good 3 months, and I'd say more if it's a cutting. They probably need, you know, 4 or 5 months in the ground if they're a cutting before they'll actually produce reliable tubers for you. So it's actually a good way to increase your stock. So it's kind of twofold digging them. You get 2 benefits really. Okay, so let me take you out. Let me show you digging them up. It's pretty simple. We're just going to go and dig them up. We're going to make sure they're labelled. We're going to dig them up and then we're going to wash them off, and I'll show you how I do that now.
I start by just chopping the top of the stems, which makes it much easier to actually just get to the dahlias. So I leave about 20 centimetres of stem sticking out the ground just so that it makes it easier for me to pull them out. And then using a fork, I gently tease each dahlia out of the ground, being really careful not to stab the tuber. I take off as much of the soil as possible just by hand. This is so much easier to do if the soil is dry, because it then just comes off very cleanly off the tuber, but you don't always have the opportunity. But it's okay because we can give these a wash in just a second.
Okay, so I've taken a row of dahlias out of the ground and we are left with something like this. Okay, so what you can do is you can now cut this back a little bit further. So the reason why I left so much on is just because it's easier to just pull them out the ground with the stem on. So I'm now just going to cut them back a little bit more, and I'm going to pop them in my tray ready for washing.
Now comes the messy part where you need to actually wash all of the tubers off. You will need a really fine nozzle on your hose pipe to be able to do this successfully. And as you can see, the nozzle is just washing all of that soil clean off the tubers. And the reason you want to do this is to make sure that when you put them into storage, that you don't have any pests lurking in that soil, which will then eat away at your tubers. And this is a really messy job. You will need to turn those tubers over a few times to make sure that you've washed all of that soil off. And you might not have crates to do this in, but that's okay, because you can do it in a bucket. You can even just do it on the grass, but you just need to kind of, keep away from your patio, anywhere that you want to protect. But you can just do it on the grass, and then that soil will just wash away onto the top of the grass as well.
Okay, so my tubers have been in these trays just overnight, and they have been drying out essentially. So here I have one of my crates of tubers that I dug up yesterday. They've really nicely dried out. They've mostly been washed off with the hose pipe. And we're now left with actually some quite big clumps. And now the decision that you need to make is how you actually want to store your dahlias. Do you want to store them as complete clumps, or do you actually want to divide them? Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's down to a certain number of factors. And the biggest one really is, do you want to divide them anyway? In which case, well, you can divide them. And how much space do you have? So to store all of these clumps like this, it actually takes up quite a lot of room. And you are actually storing quite a lot of material, which isn't viable, essentially. So on a clump like this, you can see that around the crown area, around here, all around this crown area, these tubers will all be viable tubers, and they will all get little shoots on them. And I can already see a shoot here, a new shoot coming up just from here. It's a little eye, and you can just see it just in there. And if we can actually focus on it, it's just in here. You can see that little eye here. So you can already see some of the shoots, and that would have come up if I'd have left this in the ground even longer. That would have come up and made a brand new stem for me. So what you then get is lots of tubers here in the middle underneath, which aren't necessarily viable. Now, it does depend on the variety, and sometimes you will get a variety which will shoot from underneath a little bit, but generally speaking, you get all the viable tubers just around the edge. So if you're storing them as clumps like this, you're actually storing a lot of material that you just don't need. So let me show you how I divide my tubers to pop them away for storage. And I'm going to use a variety of tools to actually cut my tuber. I've got some really pointy, sharp snips. I've got some scissors. I've got my heavy duty snips here. And I've also got some heavy duty floristry snips as well, which are fantastic. I use these for cutting my stems too. And one of the most important things is when you move from one tuber to the next is you do need to sanitize your equipment, okay? So a jar with some bleach, some water and bleach in is enough, that's plenty, just to sanitize between your actual tubers so you don't spread any diseases. Okay, so here we have the tuber, and you can see that we've got two kind of really clearly defined stems here, so two really declined halves, and we've got some damage as well. We've got some small little bits that we don't need. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to remove all of these small little spindly stems that I don't really need, and that's, you know, the plant doesn't need these are too small. These won't really provide very much for the plant for next year. So I'm going to take all of those off first, and I'm also going to take off anything that is dangling, like this one here, which isn't really attached very well, is dangling. We don't need it. I'm going to take its friend off as well. And we're going to take off all of these little rootlets, because the plant, the tuber doesn't need these. It will produce more next year, and they just kind of get in the way really. So we've got another dangly bit here. I'm going to take these off, and I'm actually going to take that off the end there as well. Anything that's a tuber on a tuber, a little bit like these as well actually. You kind of don't need a tuber that's attached to a tuber, because they're not really going to give you anything beneficial. Okay, so once you've got a tuber that is cleaned up, it's a little bit easier to see what you're working with. So, okay, we've got a much cleaner tuber here, and I can see what's going on a lot more. So I've got this damaged tuber here, which is just going to rot in storage. So we're going to get rid of that one as well. We've now got a couple of little ones we can get access to, so we'll get rid of those ones. Another one here and another one here, so we can get rid of those. Okay, so these are all, and that's a damaged one. Okay, so what you take out the ground and and another damaged one here, what you take out the ground and what you end up with are sometimes two very, very different things. So I've actually taken all of this off my tuber and I'm left with this. Okay, but I can still see we've got kind of two viable sides to this tuber. So this is going to be pretty easy, really. I need to make sure that I've got a bit of crown around here for some eyes, and I can see there are a couple of eyes just around here. It's probably quite difficult to see on the camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to split, I think, just down the middle here, so that we have a defined tuber here, and then we've got an extra one. I mean, we could take this off. It's a little bit broken. I might as well take it off. I'm going to take that one off. Okay, so we've now got a defined tuber, and I'm going to just cut this stem down because we don't need it. So we've now got one viable tuber here, and we have a crown which will have eyes on it. And then we've got another one here. Now, I think I'm just going to leave this one intact like this. I'm going to just take this off, and then I'm going to leave all this intact. I mean, essentially, this one here isn't going to do very much. This looks like it's the old original tuber, if I'm honest.
but we'll keep this. Okay, so on this particular occasion, we've only ended up with 2 tubers from that one, but you might sometimes end up with up to 10 single tubers, which are perfectly viable. Okay, so here we have the tuber, and you can see that we've got 2 kind of really clearly defined stems here, so 2 really declined halves, and we've got some damage as well. We've got some small little bits that we don't need. So the first thing I'm going to do, actually, is I'm going to remove all of these small little spindly stems that I don't really need. And that's, you know, the plant doesn't need these. These are too small. These won't really provide very much for the plant for next year. So I'm going to take all of those off first. And I'm also going to take off anything that is dangling, like this one here, which isn't really attached very well, is dangling. We don't need it. I'm going to take its friend off as well. And we're going to take off all of these little rootlets, because the plant, the tuber doesn't need these. It will produce more next year, and they just kind of get in the way, really. So we've got another dangly bit here. I'm going to take these off, and I'm actually going to take that off the end there as well. Anything that's a tuber on a tuber, a little bit like these as well, actually. You kind of don't need a tuber that's attached to a tuber, because they're not really going to give you anything beneficial. Okay, so once you've got a tuber that is cleaned up, it's a little bit easier to see what you're working with. So, okay, we've got a much cleaner tuber here, and I can see what's going on a lot more. So I've got this damaged tuber here, which is just going to rot in storage. So we're going to get rid of that one as well. We've now got a couple of little ones we can get access to, so we'll get rid of those ones. Another one here and another one here, so we can get rid of those. Okay, so these are all, and that's a damaged one. Okay, so what you take out the ground and another damaged one here, what you take out the ground and what you end up with are sometimes 2 very, very different things. So I've actually taken all of this off my tuber, and I'm left with this. Okay, but I can still see we've got kind of 2 viable sides to this tuber. So this is going to be pretty easy, really. I need to make sure that I've got a bit of crown around here for some eyes, and I can see there are a couple of eyes just around here. It's probably quite difficult to see on the camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to split, I think, just down the middle here, so that we have a defined tuber here, and we've got an extra one. I mean, we could take this off. It's a little bit broken. I might as well take it off. I'm going to take that one off. Okay, so we've now got a defined tuber, and I'm going to just cut this stem down because we don't need it. So we've now got 1 viable tuber here, and we have a crown which will have eyes on it. And then we've got another one here. Now, I think I'm just going to leave this one intact like this. I'm going to just take this off, and then I'm going to leave all this intact. I mean, essentially, this one here isn't going to do very much. This looks like it's the old original tuber, if I'm honest. But we'll keep this. Okay, so on this particular occasion, we've only ended up with 2 tubers from that one. But you might sometimes end up with up to 10 single tubers, which are perfectly viable. Okay, let's divide a second tuber so I can show you some of the other ways that you can just identify what is going to be viable. So again, I've got a couple of really good stems on this one again, but there's a lot more tubers on this one. So again, I'm going to take off all these little bits that we don't need. This one's definitely broken. And we have a few viable tubers here. So this tuber here is a perfectly viable tuber, and it's got some eyes just around it. I can see one coming just here. So we can actually detach this in its own right. There we go, just like this. So this is now a separate tuber to everything else, and it has some eyes just around the crown here. So that's a good one. We're going to keep that one. I then just work my way around the tuber, taking off all the individual tubers around the crown which have a viable eye. Okay, so we have some eyes, nice eyes just around the crown. And we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've still got the main tuber left. And you know what? Just so we can also plant this main tuber, I think I might just leave this one as it is. It's a bit of a gnarly mess, but it's perfectly viable. So I think I'm just going to leave that one as it is. Let's just take these big stems off because we don't want these to rot in storage, because they will. Okay, so we've got 4 small and 1 big gnarly one to now pack away.
I'm going to divide the rest of this crate and then I'll show you how I pack them away. Okay, so now that I have all of my tubers divided, and I have a bunch which I'm leaving not necessarily whole but quite large with lots of tubers on them like this, and then I have some others which I am leaving as singles. So I use, and there are a few different ways to store your dahlias away now. And it really does, there's no right or wrong way. It just depends on your climate, on where you live, what storage facilities you have, how often you can check them, humidity. It depends on a lot of different factors, and you might actually need to try a few different methods to see what works for you. So the method that I use is I put mine in a box. You can also use cling film, and you can wrap your tubers in cling film, but what I tend to find is that they quite often rot if I put them in cling film, especially if I pack them away straight away into the cling film. It's quite, you know, we get quite damp conditions here in the UK, and it just doesn't work for me. What I find is that these plastic crates work really, really well, and I reuse them every single year. I know they're plastic, but I reuse them every single year, essentially. And they are crates which each have a lid, okay? And it is important you do have lids. So what I have done is I actually have some drainage, some air holes in. So you can see there's 3 holes here at the top, and they are to let the moisture out if any excess moisture does need to escape. And what I fill my boxes with is this stuff. Now this is pet bedding, essentially. It's the kind of thing that you get from a pet shop for rabbits. So these are essentially, they're wood shavings, and you just buy them in a big bag like this from the pet shop. And I reuse mine every year. This is a part bag that I had left over, so I could just show you how they come. They're quite tightly packed in there, but actually this is some of last year's, just in an old compost bag that I am going to be reusing as well. So it's not a one use, you do reuse it. Okay, so I've just lined the base of my box, and what I tend to find is that with a plastic box it keeps the moisture in. I mean, you do need to put a few holes in it because you don't want it too wet in there, but it holds enough moisture in the box to keep the tubers moist, to keep them hydrated, let's say, without them being wet. And my tubers, I dug these up yesterday, so they've had like about 24 hours of drying time. When I feel them, they feel moist, but they're not, they don't feel soaking wet, they're not dripping wet. And I never put them away when they are dripping wet. Always just wait a couple of days. It'll be different. You know, these have been left inside in my utility room overnight where it's nice and dry, and they've dried out really nicely. I was actually surprised how quickly they dried out. Sometimes I've had to wait 2 or 3 days. You know, when I've put them in my garage before and it's been a bit more of a, let's say, a cooler environment, it's taken them 2 or 3 days to dry out. So you really do need to keep your eye on them. So the So the plastic box keeps the moisture in, but the wood shavings extract the excess moisture from the tuber so they don't end up rotting. And that is a kind of perfect combination, really. Moisture in, but moisture out. And this, I find, for me, works really, really well. And I will have, where have I put my lid? So, and I will put the lid on these over winter. And if I find that they are getting too wet, all I do is I can just take the lid off, let them air a little bit for a couple of days, and then pop the lid back on again. So it's super, super simple. Now, what we'll do is we will simply lay these tubers into the bottom of this crate and just make sure that they are not touching. They mustn't touch. Now, I'm going to just fiddle around just to find the best way to actually store them all, because I've got some whole ones and some part ones. So I'm going to put one here and one here, and then I'm going to just put some more shavings over the top to cover them up, and then I would just do a second layer on here, just like this. Now, you might not be keeping any whole tubers, or you might only be keeping whole tubers. You might have decided not to split yours, and either is okay. There is no hard and fast rule. Okay, so my box is nice and packed up to the brim. Now, you don't have to pack it up to the brim. You could maybe, if you've only been able to half fill it, this would only be half full. You don't need to fill it all the way up to the top. And then I'm going to pop my lid on. I'm going to actually put one of my tags inside so that I know what's in the box. And I'm actually going to label the outside of my box as well. And that's because I have about 100 different varieties. So I don't want to be searching through every single box to find a certain variety in springtime. If you only have a few varieties and you're only saving them for yourself, and you might not need to do this, maybe just putting a label inside would be enough. But this is Caitlin's Joy. So I've just put that on some masking tape. Now, what I'm not going to do at this point is actually mark each one of the tubers. I will do that in springtime when I take them out of storage, because at the moment they're too wet. If I try and write the name on them right now, it won't stick. It just won't work. Okay, so we're going to pop that on the front. And I'm now going to pop this somewhere which is cool, which is dry, but not frosty. And that's actually the most important thing to remember with your tubers. You need to put them somewhere frost free. Now, that might be a porch or it might be a garage. A garage is a really good place to store them. Okay, but in a wooden shed is not a good place to store them. A wooden shed, unless it's lined and insulated, will actually freeze over the winter time. The same with a greenhouse. A greenhouse will freeze over winter. A cold frame will freeze over winter. And a wooden shed will freeze over winter. So they kind of need to be inside in a way. So they need to be kept in a frost-free place. So anything around kind of over winter, around 5 degrees is absolutely fine. But if they are left anywhere where it freezes, where it gets below 0, they will freeze and they will not be viable. Now, last year I had mine in this same room. This is my workshop, and it gets around 5 to 10 degrees in here in the winter time, which is absolutely fine. And last year I stored one box next to a window, and what I didn't realise was that there was quite a lot of cold air coming through that window. It wasn't really closing very well. It wasn't closing properly. And the tubers that were stacked right next to the windows, luckily it was only one box, right next to the window. But on a frosty day, when it was cold, or overnight when it was frosty, there was just too much frosty air coming through that window onto my box, and that box actually was not viable. I planted them out and they just weren't viable. So you have got to be very, very careful with them. Okay, so I'm going to do the rest of my tubers now. In about 3 weeks time, I will open this crate up again, and I will take the lid off, I'll open it up, and I will check through all of my tubers. And I'm just checking for signs of rot to make sure that they're all okay. As long as they're okay, I'll pop them all back in, pop them all away again. And then after another, I'd say 4 weeks, I would do the same check all over again. So I would actually check on them a couple of times through the season. The first time, just a couple of weeks after I put them away. If I see any signs of rotting, I'd take them all out. I'd adjust. It could be that they had been put away and it was a little bit too wet. So in that case, I would just leave the lids slightly open. I would let them all air. I'd maybe take some of the worst ones just out of the wood shavings, expose them to air for a couple of days, put them back away again, and then I'd check on them again a few weeks later if I found much of that. I'll be honest though, with this method, it's very, very rare. I think, you know, if I'm saving 1,000 tubers, I would maybe find 5 or 6 which have rotted throughout the whole lot, which isn't many. And that would just be when I put them away, there may have been a little hole in them, and which I just hadn't spotted when I was putting them away and when I was dividing them, and then that's rotted them. So it's not many for me with this method. And then that's it until springtime, until it's time to wake them back up again.